Alrighty. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's conversation on the trends of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies after the US elections and their implications for Europe. This online chat is proudly brought to you by Pride Business Forum and in collaboration with European Pride Business Network. I am Czesław Walek, Chairman of Pride Business Forum, and I will be your host for tonight. I am honored to be joined for this conversation with three incredible experts on the topic who happen to be also my dear friends. Věra Jourová, the former Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency, Charlie Rounds, leader of Authority.org, an expert on corporate America and global LGBTQ+ advocacy, and Fabrice Oudard, co-founder of COPPA, the LGBTQ+ Economic Power Lab, and co-author of the UN's Business Standards on Tackling Discrimination of LGBTIQ people. Thank you all for joining me for this conversation today. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us about this subject. So, what's the agenda today? In the first part, I would like to talk about what's going on in the American corporate world, but also politics. We can see that corporate America is growingly diverting from diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I would like to discuss whether it's just momentarily hiccup or whether it is some kind of trend that we can, a long-term trend that we can expect. In the second part, I would like to touch upon the development in the social media world and on the focus of misinformation that directly affects LGBTIQ people in or out of workplaces. And then, of course, I would like to discuss what can we do personally and together with the business to prevent this backlash against D&I policies. Before we dive in, I would like to tell you all that I hope that you will join our conversation. You have a chance to actually write your comments on ask the questions. There is a chat box or Q&A box, so please use this opportunity, get involved into our conversation. I will then read your questions or comments. Okay. Let's start. And I'm very sorry, Věra, that I will start with the United States, not with Europe this time.
I understand.
But we are 3 days into Trump 2.0 administration, and things are happening. Things were actually happening already quite before that. When I was preparing this conversation, only I think McDonald's and Walmart were the companies that were dropping DEI policies, and today they are joined by Meta, by Amazon, and Trump signed the executive order deciding that all federal agencies should halt DEI policies or efforts. And if I understood correctly, he's laying down those people who were force of those efforts in these agencies. So what does it mean? Charlie, maybe I'll start with you because you work with the American businesses for decades. Is this purely political, or is it some kind of long-term shift that we can expect to come to Europe?
Well, I think it's important to note, Czesław, that there are exceptions. Costco, and you're probably not as familiar with them in Europe. They are in Paris. I know they're in a couple of countries in Europe. Costco is standing strong, and Costco's stock is up 33% over the last year. They have seen no economic backlash to them continuing DEI policies. So I think we have to remember, yes, it doesn't look great with those companies, but there are exceptions. The second thing I'll say is these companies won't stop DEI. They'll just say they are stopping DEI. there is still going to be people in human resource departments that are going to look at the hiring process to make sure that they've got a vibrant, diverse workforce. And so I think we have to look at the public image of what Trump is saying and these companies are saying to avoid backlash. But it doesn't mean internally that they're going to stop. And I think what I'll end with before turning it over to Fabrice is that there are LGBTQI people in these companies. There are African Americans, because again, we're talking about the United States. There are women, there are Latinos, there are Asian Americans, the disability community that are in positions of authority. They're not just going to stop. They may not talk about it or put it on social media, but these policies will not stop. I think they will stop publicly and openly, but that they will continue.
So Fabrice, do you agree with Charlie? Do you think that this is just the PR stand for politics, but inside they will continue with their efforts?
Yeah, completely. I love the fact that Charlie is talking about the facts. The facts have not changed, meaning that there is the relationship of younger generation to gender identity is changing. And Trump can pass as many executive orders he wants, you still are going to have people that are going to transition gender, that are going to self-identify as non-binary. That's not going to change. To me, what was kind of striking today is that you see that executive order that say, well, look, there's not going to be any more DEI initiative in the federal government. I think what is important to remember is that DEI was never about philanthropy, right? It was never a nice to have. It was never companies being nice to employees. It was remedying discrimination and non-inclusive workplace environment. Well, this is still the case. And if you take the example of LGBT people, because that's something we're very interested in, LGBT people have about 1% of board seats in companies. There is only 3 CEOs out of 500 Fortune 500 CEO that self-identify as being LGBTQ+. We have think tanks like the Williams Institute that have shown that LGBT people are overrepresented among the 40%. So what it means is that we have only scratched the surface of what equality could look like, particularly what Charlie and I have been working on, which is economic equality. We have only scratched the surface. And so the idea of saying, well, we are done now, it's a little bit crazy. So we have to differentiate the political narrative of this is over and the reality, which is LGBT people and other underrepresented groups still live at the margin of the economy, and we are going to have to take a bunch of steps until there is some fairness in the system. So to me, of course, it is political. And then the other thing that really struck me yesterday is that there was all this focus on transgender people and DEI. Well, we know that this should be the last of the worries of the Americans, right? They have much bigger issues to face, collapsing healthcare system, climate change, anti-immigrant sentiments, frankly, the collapse of democracy. Those are things that Americans should really worry about. Trans issues, workplace inclusion, that's very important, but frankly, that's not the priority. That shouldn't be the priority for the Trump administration. So we know that this is political posturing to distract of the fact that America is going through a very painful transition at this point.
Okay, I understand what you are saying, and I hear you, and I'm happy to hear that you think that it's politics. But when you look at the facts, and when you look at the timeline, when the American companies were actually dropping the DEI, it started, well, before November even. It started already earlier. And my question is whether there is no deeper trend that we are looking from those American companies. Of course, it accelerated with November after the elections, and those companies got much faster in dropping DEI. And I don't know, like maybe you are saying that this is political and those are just PR stunts, but when you hear Mark Zuckerberg saying, "Yeah, we need a little bit more masculinity in the corporate world," and they dissolved whole DEI department, it is a bit worried. I am a bit worried from the chair I'm sitting in.
So, Czeslaw, we've known each other long enough. It's difficult for me to hear you use the word worry, because you are somebody that has always stood up and fought. We can worry all we want, or we can do something. And God knows the people on this panel and probably everybody listening does something. The challenge is there's too many of us that talk and don't walk, that aren't doing a damn thing about this. So you can look though, Czeslaw, and this is where the point I would bring to what you're saying is look at Bud Light. Bud Light is an American beer. It's a disgusting American beer, but it is an American beer. It's awful. It's even almost as bad as Czech beer. Sorry, Vera.
Burn.
I mean, even French beer is better than Czech beer. But anyway, the point is, I'm kidding. The point is the Bud Light boycott over them using one single transgender influencer was massive. And that's because the conservatives act instead of talk. They do something about it. This now, Czeslaw, instead of worrying, we need to start acting. And I'll go back to Costco. We need to start really supporting Costco in visible ways to support them economically. Back to quote Fabrice, this is all about economics. And if you look at the hit that Bud Light took, and then again here in Minnesota, we have a company called Target that you don't have in Europe. The boycott last year and the removal of Pride t-shirts and other merchandise, Target took a huge hit and they backed down, whereas Costco didn't. And so there's two different reactions there, but Czeslaw, I don't think we should worry. I think what Fabrice and I and the rest of us need to do in this country, I won't talk about globally, is we need to not repeat the mistakes of the past and start this new narrative of what we're trying to do. And again, I hate to keep quoting Fabrice, but let's keep data, keep it to the facts. And I think if we do that, we'll move forward.
Yeah, Fabrice, do you want to add anything to what Charlie's mentioned?
Yeah, I like what Charlie said. I would say, Charlie's talking about Costco, but there is a number of companies that are not going back, and there's a good reason for that. If you take all of the countries as an example that are in beauty and fashion, a huge segment of their consumers are Gen Z, a huge segment of their employees self-identify as LGBT, some of them self-identify as non-binary. You will see that their marketing campaign, their communication, that's not going to change, right? Because, their interest is there. So what I think is that there's a lot of companies that are shutting down their DEI efforts because they never really got it. I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg was really converted to the fact that a more fair economic system, an economic system that is more respectful to LGBT people, was going to be more sustainable. The Bud Light example is kind of an old example, but I remember that after the Bud Light catastrophe happened, I went online and I looked at the pictures of their C-suite, right, their executive. They had 15 senior managers on the website. Only one of them was a woman, and she was in charge of HR. What it meant is that Anheuser-Busch is a company that never really understood that there was value in diversity, that it is also that companies have human rights responsibilities, in ensuring that there is no gender discrimination, as an example, in the workplace. What I mean is that all the companies that are being so vocal about dropping diversity and inclusion in the workplace, those were companies that didn't really understand it in the first place, right? And, there's guys like Mark Zuckerberg that, probably believe that a good C-suite would be a C-suite of macho guys, that go to the game and that this would be good for the company. Well, this guy, he doesn't really get it, right? And probably what it means is that his business is not going to be very sustainable. I think there are a lot of much more mature businesses that understand, A, that the world is changing, and second of all, that it is in their best interest to attract talent and retain it by creating a respectful workplace environment. So I am not convinced that it's going to be all business that are going to concede to the political environment.
So, Czeslaw, may I comment on something?
Sure.
I sent you a letter, and we'll talk about this later, with Europe, of European companies, when they open manufacturing plants in the United States, open them in the most racist, anti-LGBTQI states. So we can't hold those wonderful European companies. When they come to our country, they act in a different way, because they do it for one and one reason only: tax breaks and cheap labor force. But my point here is, where are the thoughts and ideas coming from? They're not coming from Memphis and Nashville. The tech industry, the creative industry in this country is still based in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco. I think it's 74% or something of the world's media is created in Los Angeles. And then there's New York, obviously, Chicago. These economic centers in progressive states are still the driving engines. And Mark Zuckerberg, in wherever the hell they are, Silicon Valley, you have to realize Silicon Valley is about as blue as you can get in many ways. And so creativity, economic power, economic drivers, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, all of these things that have been created in the last 10 years are still not based in St. Louis, Missouri. They're based in these big blue centered diverse. And why? Because to attract the best talent. Minnesota, my blue state in the middle of a red world, has the highest percentage of Fortune 500 companies in the United States. And and that's because we are progressive and diverse. And I want to say one last thing, and the only reason I know this is because of Fabrice Oudard, is that we have the highest percentage of immigrants in the United States. Think about that.
And we'll definitely talk about it at the end, when we will be talking about what can we do. And also, I have this topic of of responsibility of European companies outside of Europe. But now you nicely put a bridge between US and Europe. And I wanted to ask Vera about her opinion, where Europe is standing when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because maybe it's only me, but I thought, I always felt that Europe is a little bit more or slower horse in this DEI race, let's call it like this, but it's more steady, right? And Vera, you are the one who were putting together and pushing through the standards that are now on EU level around LGBTQ plus equality and DEI standards. So my question is, do you think that though this wave, maybe momentary wave, but wave of that is happening now in the US can have a similar phase in Europe?
Yeah, thank you, Czeslaw. I have to start by disclaimer. Of course, the Czech beer is the best one in the world.
Exactly. Right, so.
I had to. But let's get serious. It was interesting to be listening to you, because I really don't like hysteria and panic. I like cold thinking and realistic assessment of the situation. I think that this festival of imposed masculinity will not last forever, and it will not catch everyone. And you described it very well. In Europe, as you know, on European level, we didn't have direct legislation which would somehow rule or create the rules for diversity. We had the diversity charter, which the companies could embrace, and they signed into it. And I spoke to many companies why they are doing it, why they are joining the diversity charter. And of course, I heard a lot of nice words about humanity and equality, but behind that was something which is very logical and business related. And this is what you said, Charlie: vibrant, diverse workforce. What I heard from them: diverse workforce pays off. And it's good for business, not only for marketing reasons. And so I would say that the business will find its way. And it's also the case of European businesses operating on European market. Your question, Czeslaw, whether it will have implications or impact in the EU, we already have it. We have countries which, of course, have now the politicians leading the countries whose one of the main slogans is that they have to stop, how they call it, LGBT ideology or gender ideology or LGBT propaganda. I can name Hungary, and the most harsh case or example of the real thing which Viktor Orban did. It was the law on education, which prohibited any mention about the LGBT people in the educational system. When Orban adopted, or Hungary adopted this a piece of legislation, I think it was in 2020 or 21. We were really shocked, because in this legislation, the LGBT people were kind of compared with pedophiles, and the most horrible stereotype was in the law. And in that moment, maybe you remember that, Czeslaw, we had 18 member states which signed the declaration that this is unacceptable. 18 out of 27. The Commission put this case to the European Court of Justice, and the first hearing happened in November last year, so it's rather fresh. It was the Commission against Hungary. We had on our side European Parliament, which officially applied also on the side of the climate, and 16 member states were on our side. So it was a proactive action against this law, and we are waiting for the result of the case at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. And this case law has impact on all member states. So when Bulgaria is now doing the same thing, in Slovakia they are considering such law, there are actions in Italy. I think after having such law, such decision of the court, we will be much stronger in using legal tools. And these legal tools being used could lead to very, very heavy sanctions, financial sanctions. So sorry, you know, I'm a lawyer, so I had to explain that properly. But you wanted, Czeslaw, to explain to me how I see the division of opinions. Well, 16 member states out of 27. Well, it's not enough, obviously. And if I still have some portion of time to explain what the EU is doing.
Sure.
You said, Czeslaw, and I like it, I put it down, that Europe is slow but steady. And I think it applies, and it's a good thing, because also the new commission now, which replaced us. Fortunately, I'm happy back. But the new commission, through Ursula von der Leyen, declared clearly, we will continue the policy of no tolerance for discrimination, no tolerance of hate speech and hatred, and what is the third thing? Proactive work against the stereotypes. And this is exactly what we have in the strategy for LGBTIQ, which is finishing this year. It will have to be renewed. And I expect there will be no revolution. I expect I will see the similar things in the new strategy. The second thing, there are 12 member states which already have action plans. I bet these are the states which are behind us at this court case. As for the legislation, I proposed the better definition of hate speech and hate crime. It required unanimous yes from the member states. We didn't get it. So when speaking about hate speech online, especially, at this moment, we have harmonized definitions of hate on the basis of racism and xenophobia, not against LGBT. Hate against LGBT is still defined in all member states in the criminal laws. So this is pending, this is in the making, and the Eurocrime, which contains hate speech against LGBT, I think it should be the next milestone for this commission. The good thing is that in the Digital Services Act, we prohibited micro-targeting on the basis of sensitive data, which is a good thing as well, because we are prohibiting micro-targeting on the basis of religion, sexual orientation, race, and political opinions and membership in trade unions. So when you realize the practical impact of it, it's important because micro-targeting it can be a horrible tool being used by the big tech through the algorithms. Last thing regarding legislation, which is also pending, it's my proposal to recognize the parental status in the member states when the parental rights are acknowledged in one member state. When the pair is moving to another member state, it should be recognized as well. It's based on the so-called Coman case from 2021, or no, 18. It was the commission against Romania. And I wanted this to be in the legislation. Surprise, surprise. Also, this legislation requires unanimity. So it's being parked. And I was so naive. I was convinced that if I propose this as a recognition of parental rights for the children who already live in the same-sex family, it will be easier to pass. I was not courageous enough to propose the recognition of marriages, you know? And still, even though it is about the children, and in the best interest of those children, it didn't pass. So it also speaks something about the atmosphere in the EU. Last thing, I think that we will go to it in the next round. It's the digital jungle. And tech oligarchs dictating their worldview and their hate speech and hatred to the global, to the whole world.
This is definitely the topic that I would like to touch upon. But yeah, it's actually good to hear. Although we do have in Europe our little Trumps as well. Some countries are governed by the little Trumps. It's actually good to hear that we still have a trust in the umbrella in the system, that EU still has our backs, which I think at this moment in the United States might not be the case. The similar law that you were described in Hungary, the anti-LGBTIQ law on education, is widespread also in the United States on the state level. This is not something that you don't know about. You actually, I think that the Florida is a good example that you had it, and I don't know whether there will be a case on Supreme Court or not. But I think what is important to for us to know that there is some kind of safeguard in terms of the system in Europe. In terms of the companies, I think, Charlie, you touch upon very important topic is, okay, the European companies that are ethical in Europe, when moving to the US, they are looking at the profits, not at ethics. And what can we do about that?
Well, I think it's critical that I want to go back to something. There's a movie, it's called The Wizard of Oz. I don't know if you all know what the movie is. Judy Garland, of course, another great Minnesotan. But in the movie, the wizard says to her, you always had the answer. You click the heels and you can go home. We have the answer to all these things, Czeslaw. It's economic power. Companies move, European companies, to your point, move to the south of the United States because they don't want to pay people wages and they don't want these restrictive laws on themselves. So Volkswagen, Airbus of all things, can talk all they want about DEI and blah, 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 blah. But when they come to the United States, they support these mini Trumps in the southern United States. So I don't want to hear Airbus, Volkswagen, Mercedes talk about positive when they move to the US and invest billions of dollars to support the mini Trumps. I have no respect for them. So what can we do? Well, how many Europeans are traveling to the state of Florida? Millions. Ron DeSantis, who created these Ergon type laws, or the Don't Say Gay, has seen no economic repercussions to the laws being passed. Texas. Fabrice, you talked earlier about all these Gen XYZs. I'm too old to even know what they are or who they are. But you have a mass influx of young people to Texas and Florida. Why? Because there is no state income tax. So they are willing to change their civil rights to not pay taxes. And we have to look at that. And so the key to any of this to me is we support companies and countries and states that are doing the right thing. And that's why, Czeslaw, what can you do in Europe? Don't go to Florida, right? And if you work...
Apparently it's snowing there now, so we will not go.
But if you work for Volkswagen or Mercedes or Airbus, ask the senior management, why are you in South Carolina? Why are we in Alabama? And as an employee, if you're LGBT and you have to go to those factories in the US, are you safe? Because I don't know if you are.
No, we are not, but probably like the pattern that you mentioned, this economic pattern that the companies are led by and individuals are led by. We are looking at first, we are looking what does it bring it to the pocket, and then we are looking whether it's actually safe. And maybe this is something that we need to look at and change. Fabrice, you mentioned before we started that one of the conversations that we may have continue even with this environment is economic empowerment. That this is a one topic that even this administration can actually reflect on.
Yeah, I love this. I have to say, you know, I was joking about the fact that, you know, Charlie was one of the first person that paid attention to the fact that, you know, when you meet LGBT people throughout the world, very often they will talk to you about their desire to make a living, you know, and the fact that one of the most important and the most elusive thing for them is making a living. And in fact, you know, one of the things that I realized when I was working at the World Bank is that what is kind of fascinating is what when LGBT people manage to insert themselves in the economy, they also meet greater societal acceptance, meaning that they make gains on human rights by being included in the economy. You know, one of the things that we always know is that violation of human rights very often translate into being somewhat marginalized in the economy. And so what it means is that as a minority, right, because LGBT people are a minority, a small group of people that historically has lived at the margin of society and the economy, if we want to have a fair share of GDP growth, if we want to have a fair share of the economy, we have to be proactive about it. And that's something we have not done a lot. You know, we have, in many ways, we are telling companies, well, please, you know, give us a chance at, you know, working in your company, maybe give us a chance at getting to middle management. What we know is that it remains very difficult for LGBT people to make it to senior management, the C-suite, the board. Well, the truth is that LGBT people also have the opportunity to create their own companies, right? And sometimes that's very difficult for them because they don't have access to capital. They don't have access to the capital of the community and sometimes of the family. So what it means is that there's a bunch of links that are not existent, and we have not paid a lot of attention to it. Frankly, as LGBT people, one of the things we really wanted was not being criminalized anymore and getting marriage equality. But now there is a bit of a shift toward an understanding that it might be important for LGBT people to maybe create their own economy, create their own access to finance, so that they are not at the mercy of companies that clearly sometimes change their mind on whether we have a right to be there or not. And so you know, I was joking earlier, I was saying, well, look, Charlie did all this hard work working in small communities, kind of trying some initiative on how maybe by giving small loans to people, they might, you know, they might be more willing to create a small enterprise and then employ other LGBT people. Now that there is a renewed focus on it, my goal is to take credit for all the work that Charlie has done. And maybe, you know, one of my hope is that it's going to be scaled up. You know, what I think is certain, Czesław, is that we cannot be complacent, right? We cannot be like, oh, this is happening to us. This is so unfortunate, and, you know, be ready for martyrdom. What we have to do is we have to adapt our strategy to the context. And right now, you know, Vera was mentioning Viktor Orban. You know, we are talking about Donald Trump. There are politicians that feel that they might gain a lot by scapegoating the LGBT community. Well, we don't have to be passive in that process. Why don't we focus on something that is still within reach for us, which is economic empowerment? So what I'm hoping is that more LGBT people are going to work on this topic, and that, you know, while Donald Trump can pass executive orders that don't have much consequences, what we will do is that we will be working and ensuring that our community has economic opportunities.
Wonderful, thank you. Before I give you a floor, Vera, I just would like to remind to our audience that you can ask the questions either through the chat box or Q&A. We have 15 more minutes, so don't hesitate to ask our panelists the question. Vera, floor is yours. And then I would like to also know, what do you think about Zuckerberg? You've met him personally. So do you think that this is his masculine stand on the DEI, or whether it's just he just wants more bucks in his pocket?
Yeah, okay. I met almost all of them. But maybe what I wanted to say before, what is shocking is that Putin's main ideologist is Dugin, who came with the idea or with the trend of something which was called by sociologists sexualization of enemy. Yeah. And in fact, in Russia, Russia is a special case, but in countries where they are taking this part of ideology of Putin, they know that they do not risk anything by attacking LGBTI people. Yeah. But that's not so much a bad feature only of the politicians, but of the society. Yeah. When you are a politician who starts attacking LGBTI people, then you have very good calculation that it will pay off, that the society will accept it. And it's even being used as the fig leaf, reverting the attention to something which is safe and not to discuss the real problems of the people. You ask about Zuckerberg. Well, they are the new gods, these tech oligarchs. Mark Zuckerberg, if I saw the figure well, Meta is covering now or is having 3 billion users globally, 3 billion. Yeah. And when I met him twice, and once I think it was on Skype. I asked him whether he is aware of the monstrous power he has and of the effect his network had on the society, because over centuries, the humankind, the people, tried to get rid of the tribal organization. Tribes means conflict and war. And we tried to get rid of it for the sake of good of the people. And he established it again through the bubbles. And it was a useless discussion because he didn't have a clue what I speak about. And then I realized that I had to be much more simple, that I had to say, don't damage the European society by not respecting our laws and our reasons for having such laws. For instance, that the horrible Second World War started by words. Yeah. And so the second and third meeting were much more sophisticated. And I think that he also was explained by his people why in Europe we are so stubborn that we need to have rules for the digital space, because we have a horrible, horrible experience and the history must not repeat itself. With others, of course, I will not name and shame, but I never met Mr. Musk and I didn't want to meet him because already in summer last year, I started to write a book which will be published next month. And I already there wrote that he doesn't recognize good and evil, and that he is a propagator or promoter of evil. And I didn't want to meet him because I don't want to shake hands with such people. And then we had some exchange in the digital
exchange, yeah.
space. And we both, I know I'm swallowing too much time, Czeslaw, but maybe last comment. We both used our freedom of speech. I used mine. I said that he is a promoter of evil. He used his freedom of speech to say that I am a bureaucratic evil, a banal bureaucratic evil, even indicating to what Hannah Arendt wrote about Eichmann. Yeah, it was a sophisticated offense. And so two people using the freedom of speech. My statement was read by some say 8 million people. His response was read by 1 billion. And in the interviews, I was interviewed twice today, and in both the journalists repeated his offense and not what I said. You know, the asymmetry. And this person with such monstrous power is 5 centimeters far from the most powerful man in the world, who is currently Mr. Trump. The concentration of power is extremely dangerous, and it does not belong to democratic arrangement, because democracy is built on limitation of power. Nobody should have absolute power. And this is what we see now.
Yeah, that's scary. I would like to come back a little bit to Zuckerberg and the policy that they changed with Meta, and which will not affect LGBTIQ people in Europe, I suppose, because of the protections at this moment. But it probably does already affect LGBTIQ people in the United States, because the fact that there is no protection and they changed the policy, and you can call LGBTIQ people mentally ill and nobody will be facing any fact check about it, is something that you in US have to face. So can you already maybe see the effects of this change, or is it again some kind of like public PR stand and the effect is not there? I'm asking American colleagues. Fabrice, maybe, yeah.
Well, you know, I think what is kind of fascinating is that, again, the rhetoric is so dissociated from the reality of LGBT people. The reality of LGBT people is that even today, in the education system, LGBT people suffer, right? We still experience the burden of shame. We experience the burden of shame within our family. And then, you know, we get on social networks and we still experience the burden of shame, right? That's what is kind of important. The experience of LGBT people as human beings remain painful. You know, probably less painful in the United States and other parts of the globe, but we're still very far from having, you know, a life of dignity, a childhood that is putting us on the right path for success and fulfilling our potential. That's what is important, right? And if you are Mark Zuckerberg, right, and you create, your company create a monster that is adding to that already terrible experience, which is the experience of being born LGBT in a world that is heteronormative, you have a responsibility, right? You know, your greed doesn't prevent you from having to respond to the fact that you have created something that has a negative impact on a community that is already marginalized. Those are the facts. That's what is important, right? The fact that then Zuckerberg is saying, well, you know, look, this is getting in the way of Facebook making money. It's too difficult, you know, we cannot handle it. That's rhetoric, right? The fact is that LGBT people are already marginalized, and very often social networks, like in fact also video games, tend to have a negative impact on them, and it is the responsibility of those companies to remedy it. You know, I think something we forget a lot in the United States is this question of what is the responsibility of company. And I had a boss when I was at the United Nations, Kate Gilmore. She was the deputy secretary for human rights. She used to say, and people hated it, but she used to say, with the privilege of making profit comes great responsibility. And I think, you know, that's what people like Zuckerberg needs to hear, you know.
So Czesław, may I comment on that?
Yes.
What concerns me is, you know, there's an expression in English: if you act like a martyr, you will be treated like a martyr. And I agree with Fabrice that, you know, we are discriminated against. We have a hard time. We're the only minority population in the world that has to come out, right? That we have, but what I don't want to lose sight of here is we still have power. And I think this is a time right now, under what Vera has brilliantly spoken about, the oligarchy of evil. We've not even touched on Peter Thiel, who is one of them, even more evil, and he's gay. But the reality is, let's not only talk to our community about how weak they are and how much they're going to suffer over the next 4 years. Let's empower them economically. Let's empower them mentally and spiritually to know that they still have worth. We can do that. You know, I think somebody in the chat, Petra, talked about CSOs. There are CSOs that are leaving Meta. Let's collectively do something, but not just leave Meta, which I think we should, but let's create. Right now, there is a progressive version of Twitter or X or whatever it's called. I was never on it. I'm too old. Is that let's create our own institutions that can promote value. And that is still possible. Ches, I just don't want to talk about weakness. I want to talk about strength. And yes, I am a white cisgender male. And I realize that brings privileges. But I work with trans people globally, and they are some of the strongest people I know who have been, gender non-conforming, that have been through hell, and they get up every single day in Kampala, Uganda, and they go to work and they try to change things. And if they can do that in Kampala, Uganda, I damn well better be able to do it in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Great. So exactly, let's move to what can we do to prevent this backlash. And as Petra asked, is one of the actions that we could do leaving the Twitter or X, leaving the Meta social media, and inspiring others to do the same? Is it the answer? Charlie said yes. What do you think, Fabrice?
Yeah, I think punishing companies, that's not a bad idea. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get LGBT people to use their economic power for many reasons, right? Historically, they have not been used to do that. I think, I love what Charlie said. I think we are not, and, Vera kind of mentioned it too, right? She said, well, look, it's this idea of making political gain by pointing the finger at the minorities. That's the oldest political trick in the playbook, right? It has been practiced with Jewish people throughout the history of Europe. And what Jewish people have done is that they have organized themselves, and in many ways, one of the things that I've been pushing as an example, I have a nonprofit here called the Association of LGBTQ plus Corporate Directors. And the idea is to get LGBT corporate directors and their allies to organize themselves through informal network so that they succeed in the workplace, so that they pick up the phone and they call each other when there is an opportunity, so that they champion each other, right? And in many ways, I think, there is many things we can do, support informal network of LGBT people, focus on economic empowerment because it's less controversial, change our narrative too, right? I mean, that's what Charlie said, right? In this idea of like, let's not present ourselves as martyrs. Well, we can be strategic into how we intervene in the public sphere. There are topics that we don't have public support for, but there are topics we have public support for. So I completely agree with Charlie that there are many concrete steps we can take so that, we don't find ourselves passively on the receiving end of a demagogue instrumentalization of our lives.
And I think one thing that you all mentioned is that these diversity, equity, and inclusion policies are mainly about employees, and those employees are staying in those companies. And although I've heard it from Meta, many are leaving, but they can use their power to actually influence what their companies are doing. There is lots of groups within the companies, employee resource groups. They can use their influence on the companies. So the companies are not going away from the DEI policies and efforts. Right. Vera, do you have some tips? What can we do in these times as individuals or maybe as part of the companies?
I am thinking about the solution. We'll see how the big tech will behave in Europe. Yeah, we have the rules. I hope the Commission will enforce it. There is a sanction which could lead even to suspension of the operations of such company on European market. It can be done by the European Court of Justice, in case the companies do not comply with European rules. It's the last resort, of course. But You spoke about the change of Meta approach to fact-checking and moderation of content, which might mean that they will open the gate wide for hate speech. I guess I am not such a good expert in American legislation, but I believe that there is also legislation which prohibits threatening people. No, is it or not?
It would probably be via state by state, which is, of course, the challenge in this country is we have 50 states with 50 different sets of laws. So I can't answer that question. I don't know if Fabrice can or not.
Yeah, because hate speech is in EU, it's criminal thing. Yeah, but what Meta announced also following the Twitter, and Charlie, I am also too old. I hope I am younger than you. But I still use Twitter, sorry.
Yeah.
But Twitter came with the idea of community nodes. Yeah, which I responded as, does that mean that the crowd is always right?
Right.
Or that maybe in the future AI will be always right? That's dangerous. And I asked whether in their system they count with involvement of experts, expert voice. And I think that if Meta follows the same method, we should have the same response. I think that there should be a very serious consideration of how to get into the system of community nodes to bring the facts. Because we didn't speak at all about the society and why hate speech and disinformation targeting LGBT is correlating with the level of education. Of course, the correlation is clear. The lower education, the bigger acceptance of stereotypes and conspiracy theories. Yeah, and I spoke to the inventor of internet, Tim Berners-Lee. It was a very sad man because he said that he invented this so that to cultivate the society, the people, educate and help the communication. And now he sees the jungle, yeah. But we cannot resign on it. And Charlie, what you said, we have to act back. I think this is very hard work to educate the society. For instance, to be LGBTQI person, it's not a disease, it's not a crime. You know exactly what is flying in the information space, and to be patient and to involve numerous big number of people who will not leave the social media. It's not a solution, no, but to be more active and to try to occupy the information space better and in bigger numbers. Of course, if Musk will use AI, robots, bots, all those technologies, algorithm which only will push up the anti-LGBT content, you cannot do much against that. That's a horrible thing on the power he has, he and others. But still, the resignation would be to withdraw. I would advise be very intense in terms of quantity and quality of the messages, and try to affect the level of knowledge in the society.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And with these words, I would end this conversation. I thank you very much for joining me for this conversation. I think it was very refreshing to hear that we shouldn't resign, that this situation maybe doesn't look as dim as it might seem, and that we need to be active. And if we are active and we act together, and maybe we could have similar effect as conservatives on Bud Light, and some companies will actually revert from what they are doing right now. So thanks a lot for this conversation, and I wish you good night, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye from Prague.
Thank you.